enjoy hand sewing just as much as I do? Do you really enjoy those slow stitch projects that include lots of different techniques like embroidery and English paper piecing, hand quilting? Do you also really love long-term projects, large ones like quilts, English paper pieced quilts, applique quilts? Perhaps you have a large pile of half-made quilts like I do, because I love those sort of projects, and I also really love starting something new, but that's led to this huge pile of whips. Well, today I'm going to show you what I think is the perfect project for people like us who really love hand sewing, who really enjoy long-term projects, but also who like to get those little finishes in between. I'm going to show you how to make what I think is the perfect quilt. It is a quilt as you go hexagon quilt, and I'm going to show you how I personalise it to make it really special to me, and how I include lots of different techniques. So it's a long-term project, but also you get those little finishes in between when you complete a block. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. But first of all, I'd really like to thank Serious Readers for very kindly sponsoring today's video. Serious Readers is a British company, and their range of serious lights are built right here in the UK. They are really special because they use something called daylight wavelength technology, and what that does is replicate daylight as closely as possible to the real thing. I've been using one of their lights for the majority of this year, and it really has made a huge difference to my sewing experience. I work in a north-facing room, so I use it even in the daytime, and it really allows me to colour match my fabric and threads perfectly. And with a project like the one I'm showing you today, that has been something I've been doing a lot of, and it's been so easy because of using the light. It's also great because when you're working with fine threads, as I often do, it can be difficult to see your stitches, but because you can adjust the brightness of the light, I have no problem seeing my work at all, and I just can't be without this light now. I really enjoy using it. If you're interested in finding out more about the light, I'll leave a link in the description box below. And if you do decide to purchase one, you can use the offer code EMMA20 and you will receive a free compact light if you buy a high definition, an Alex light or a classic light. So a huge thank you to Serious Readers again for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the quilt. So to make a quilt as you go hexagon, you need 3 main ingredients. You need fabric that will go on the back of your hexagon but wrap around to the front to frame it. You need some wadding, and you also need your main fabric that will be the front of your hexagon. Now you need to cut out 2 different hexagon sizes. So for the main fabric, the top of your hexagon, I used a 3 1/4 inch hexagon for those, and I also cut the wadding out to be that size as well. And for the fabric that wraps around from the back to the front, the backing piece, I cut out a 4 inch hexagon in those. I had an acrylic template for the smaller hexagon, but because I didn't for the larger one, I just made one out of paper and cut it with a ruler. Yes, I cut the odd bit of paper off at times, but it's not a big problem and you can make many more of them. And that worked just as well. It's just a little way round having a acrylic template to do it. Now, you can use any fabric that you wish to use. For the ones that I've added applique or embroidery, I just used plain quilting cotton. But for the other ones, I've really mixed it up and used repurposed fabric and also scraps that are really special to me in a variety of different prints. The first thing to do is to layer up your hexagon. So I'm folding mine in half and then half again to find the centre point of the backing hexagon, and I've placed that with right side down. That's really important. And I'm doing the same thing with the wadding so that I can layer that on top and get it right in the middle, because we really want an even border all the way around it. Then you just place your top one on top of the wadding, and then when you're happy with the position you can pin it all in place, but just make sure you've got a nice even border all the way around. Now this little Clover pressing tool is really useful. You don't have to have one, you can press it with your fingers or with an iron, but I really love using this Clover pressing tool. So I'm just folding that edge over by about 1/4 of an inch. It doesn't reach the other hexagon. I've left a small gap, and that is so that it can bend over nicely and it won't cause the other hexagon to fold over a bit. You can use the pressing tool to help you get a nice crisp edge, and then these wonder clips, the mini wonder clips, are really useful for just holding things in place. I love using them, but you can use pins if you don't have any of those. So just continue like this, making sure you line up the corners neatly and get that lovely mitered corner. Just continue like this all the way around your hexagon. Because you place the backing fabric right side down when you layered up your hexagon, it means that the right side of the fabric is now framing your top hexagon. And now it's time to sew. So I've just used some So Fine polyester thread. You can use any thread for this. And I'm just starting a little way in from the corner, and I'm burying my tail in the quilt sandwich, so it's none of these stitches are going to show on the back. I'm just catching the edge of the folded hexagon as I sew along. Nothing is going to show on the back because I'm running my stitches through the quilt sandwich. I'm just making little stitches and running the thread underneath so nothing shows. It's just the same technique that you would use to sew the binding on your quilt. When you get to the corner, just do the same thing, just catch the corner fabric as you work your way up the mitered corner in the same way, just to secure it and keep everything neat. And when you get to the top, you can then run your needle back down and carry on along the straight edge. To finish your stitches, I just do a little knot and then bury the thread again inside the quilt sandwich. And it's as simple as that, and I've timed myself actually, and I found that I could sew the whole thing in about 11-12 minutes. So I think a whole hexagon really takes no longer than 20 minutes to make if you're doing one with just an ordinary piece of fabric on the top. So they're really quick to make, and it's so nice that you've got a finished piece. It's finished on the back and the front. So, of course, you can embellish your hexagons, and I've been using some vintage embroidery transfers, and I've just traced them so that I can save the transfer. And when I do this, I actually stitch into the wadding. So after tracing the design, I layer up the piece on top of the wadding, but I don't add the backing. I do that when the embroidery is finished. So I'm just pinning it in place, and then I will stitch the design before turning it into a quilt as you go hexagon with the backing on. You might not want to use the wadding and stitch onto that like I've done, because when you put your backing layer on, you can feel the stitches a little bit. So you might prefer to just maybe use a hoop and just stitch on the fabric, then cut your hexagon out then put the wadding on and layer it all up and follow the previous steps. It's entirely up to you. The stitches that you can feel on the back actually don't bother me at all, so I'm happy to do it like this because I like stitching into the wadding. Now, one thing that you can do is add some quilting stitches, and I've just done this row of running stitch right round the hexagon, and they go through to the back so they can be seen on the back and the front. Just something extra, a little bit of extra detail, a bit of extra framing, and another way to hold the layers together. I'm going to add that stitching to all of my hexagons, but I can join them together first and then do that afterwards. The little appliques are really fun to do, and I use a technique where I actually use the hexiform to make the applique. If you're interested in that, I will be putting a workshop on my stitch school at some time in the future where I'll be going into detail, and there will be a lovely pattern to go with that, and it will be house themed as well. So I hope that you'll like to check that out. So now it's time to lay out your hexagons and get a feel for the placement and where you want them to go. I think I'm just going to sew them into flowers like this with something embellished in the middle, so either an embroidery one or an applique one. So now it's time to sew them together, and this is actually really easy and quick to do as well. I'm placing 2 hexagons right sides together, and I'm going to ladder stitch them together. But first I'm going to secure my thread in the corner by just doing a knot, and I'll cut the tail off afterwards when everything is really secure. And then for a ladder stitch, you want to take a small stitch under the fold of one of the hexagons, and then when you make your next stitch, you do it directly opposite where your last stitch ended on the other side, and you just alternate back and forth, making those small stitches under the fold. Keep them close together because we don't want this to be weak. We do want a nice strong stitch as we go along, and I highly recommend using a polyester thread for this because, as you'll see in a minute, we are going to pull our thread to pull all the stitches tight, and if you use cotton there is a real chance that you might snap it, so polyester is the way to go for this. You can see that as we make these horizontal stitches under the fold of each hexagon, you can see some ladders forming, some vertical stitches forming across the gap. And that's why we pull it at the end, because those stitches will disappear and everything will be nice and secure, and the 2 edges of the hexagon will be nicely buttered up together. There won't be any gaps. So this is a great technique for closing gaps and joining things together. So now, after joining 2 together just along one seam, I'm going to go and join the next hexagon on just in exactly the same way, just to join them all together along each seam with a ladder stitch. and here's where I'm up to so far. I'm really enjoying this project, and if you remember, I said at the beginning that I think this is the perfect quilt, and I think the reason for that is because it's always in a state of kind of finished, because it's quilt as you go, so the back's done, the edges are done, and you can make it a certain size and use it, but then in the future you can decide to add more to it, and that's so easy to do. So in that sense, it's like the long-term project that never ends if you don't want it to. You can make it as big or small as you like, you can use it in between, and also it's 2 quilts in one because you get a pieced back with it, which I just think is so lovely. It's great that you really get a different look on the back completely to the front. It's just bringing me so much joy. So that's why I really think that this is the perfect quilt project. Because if you're like me and enjoy your long-term projects so much that you don't want them to end, this can be the quilt that never ends. And also, you get 2 quilts in one, as well as those little finishes in between when you complete each hexagon. I've incorporated so many personal things into this, from the motifs in the fabric that have that personal meaning to me because they reflect things that I've loved since I was a child. It's just things that make my heart sing, and also I've used fabrics that also mean a lot to me. I'm using things that are repurposed. So it's really going to be an eclectic piece when it's bigger than it is now, with so much meaning packed into it. And I will be sure to show you it in the future when it's bigger and it has more things added to it. So do let me know if you're going to give this a go and you're going to make one. I would absolutely love to hear about your plans for a quilt as you go hexagon quilt. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Please, if you could press the like button, then that would really help me out. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.